We're focusing on Jesus' last week, what we call Holy Week, and what a powerful week. Jesus entered Jerusalem triumphantly, right? He entered like a king with the people waving their palm branches and shouting, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." And he spent his days teaching in the temple, and he was kind of going head to head with the religious leaders there. He was rejecting their authority and even warning the people about these religious leaders, some of them. But then each night he'd go back out to the Mount of Olives so that he could sleep. And about the middle of the week is when Judas decided that he was going to betray Jesus. And then Jesus shared that Last Supper, that Passover meal with his disciples. And then he went back out to the Mount of Olives, to the Garden of Gethsemane. And there Judas led a crowd to come and arrest Jesus in the garden, take him to the high priest's house. Peter, he sort of followed from a distance, but ended up denying that he even knew Jesus 3 times. The crowd that was holding Jesus, they taunted him, they beat him, and then finally led him to the beginning of the prosecution, so to speak, by the religious leaders. Hear these words. When day came, the assembly of the elders of the people, both chief priests and scribes, gathered together, and they brought Jesus to their council. They said, "If you are the Messiah, tell us." He replied, "If I tell you, you will not believe, and if I question you, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the power of God." All of them asked, "Are you then the Son of God?" He said to them, "You say that I am." Then they said, "What further testimony do we need? We have heard it ourselves from his own lips." Then the assembly rose as a body and brought Jesus before Pilate. They began to accuse him. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Do you know how many weeks are in an average human lifespan? 4,000. 4,000 weeks. That's how much time most of us have on earth, on average, right? I've lived about 2/3 of that time now, but I'm going for 5,000 weeks. We'll see about that. Of course, our lives in this time, they're a gift. They are a gift from God, and it is a fragile gift. None of us know how many weeks that we'll actually live. Jesus didn't live 4,000 weeks. He lived as one of us on earth for actually less than half of that amount of time. But one of those weeks, his last one, was so very important. It had a profound impact on all the weeks that we live. So after Jesus had been betrayed in the Garden of Gethsemane by Judas, and the disciples, really, they all fled and deserted him, the crowd, they grabbed Jesus and they bound him and they took him to the high priest. And the chief priests and the elders, the scribes, the legal experts, they were all assembled. These are the people that Jesus had sort of been confronting and having conflict and arguments. He sort of had this showdown, so to speak, during the week at the temple. And Jesus had really been rejecting their authority and warning the people about them. So early in the morning, word was sent out that there was to be this sort of emergency meeting. That means the religious leaders, they all got text messages that they were going to roll into the chief priest's house, right? And they got there and they had Jesus in front of them and they said, "Are you the Messiah, the Christ?" And Jesus said, "From now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the power of God." And incredulously, they asked, "Are you saying that you're the Son of God?" And Jesus said, "You say that I am." And they cried out, "Oh, we don't even need any more testimony. We've heard his guilt from his own lips." Now, all of this might not seem like a lot to us. It might seem a little bit vague, but in these very few words, Jesus affirmed that he is indeed the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of God. So the phrase about the Son of Man being seated at the right hand of the power of God, it comes from Psalm 110, in the middle of our scriptures, part of the Hebrew scriptures. Psalm 110, which says, "The Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand." But this also comes from the book of Daniel in the Old Testament, or the Hebrew scriptures. The prophet there says, "I saw one like a son of man coming with the clouds of heaven. And he came to the Ancient One and was presented before him. To him was given dominion and glory and kingship, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that shall not pass away, and his kingship is one that shall never be destroyed." So they asked, "Are you the Messiah, the Christ?" And Jesus' answer, in just a few words, pointed to the scriptures, the very scriptures that the chief priests and the elders and the legal experts would certainly know. And these religious leaders, they tore their clothing in shock as a symbol of anger, even grief for the blasphemy that they thought they were hearing from Jesus. See, they already had wanted to put him to death. They had already wanted to kill him, but now they really wanted to kill him. But they didn't have the authority to carry that out. Only the Roman overlords could execute someone, could put someone to death. So they bundled up Jesus, and they pushed him on over to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. And there they began to accuse Jesus. So Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And the religious leaders, they believed that Jesus had committed this blasphemy, this terrible sin, in equating himself with God. The Romans, they didn't really care about that at all. But they did care about someone who was setting himself up as a king, because that was about politics and about money and power. But in the end, Pilate really had no interest in prosecuting Jesus. But when he found out that he was a Galilean, he was able to sort of pass the buck and get rid of the pesky religious leaders all at the same time by sending Jesus over to Herod, the one who was considered the king of the Jews in the government's eyes. Now, Herod was delighted. He was delighted. He'd heard so much about Jesus, and he wanted the dog and pony show. He wanted some entertainment. He wanted to see what would happen, but Jesus wouldn't play ball. Wouldn't do anything. So Herod just ended up mocking him and sending him back to Pilate. And in a throwaway line there in the Gospel of Luke, Luke wrote that Pilate and Herod, they became friends that very day. Still today, allegiances are formed by enemies who have a common rival, and that's Jesus. So Pilate called in the religious leaders, and again, he said, "Look, there's no legal basis for the charges that you've brought against him. I didn't find anything, and neither did Herod. So I'll just give him a whipping and let him go." But then they began shouting at Pilate, "No, don't release Jesus. Release Barabbas instead." Luke tells us Barabbas had been thrown into prison for a riot and for murder. He may have killed people during a violent uprising against Rome. And Pilate didn't want to release Barabbas. He didn't. Barabbas was a criminal. He was a bad dude. He was, kind of a terrible human being. So he told the religious leaders that he was going to release Jesus. And the religious leaders pressed in upon him even more, and they started shouting, No, crucify him, crucify him. And Pilate was exasperated, and he said, "Why? There's no legal basis for the death penalty. I'm just going to whip him and let him go." But the religious leaders, they just kept at it, and they kept screaming at Pilate, demanding that Jesus be crucified. And finally, they just wore Pilate down. And he granted their request. He released Barabbas, a violent creature in prison for insurrection and murder. And he handed Jesus over to be crucified. That is, to be nailed with spikes through his hands and his feet, to be fastened, affixed to a cross where he would hang until he died. But you see, here it is. The Barabbas story is really the gospel in miniature, because you and me, we're Barabbas. We're Barabbas. Our lives are on the line. We've done terrible things. We've turned away from what God has wanted. We deserve punishment. But Jesus, who's done nothing wrong, who was sinless, stepped in and took our place. If Pilate had not released Barabbas, Barabbas would have died. He would have been executed. But Jesus took his place. Barabbas was the very first sinner, so to speak, for whom Jesus died. And like Barabbas, Jesus died in place of you and me. You were destined for death, but Jesus stepped in and took your place. The Hunger Games is a young adult fictional book trilogy and movie series, and the plot revolves around the so-called Hunger Games, a horrendous and cruel punishment for an earlier generation's rebellion against the government. It's literally a televised fight to the death in which 2 teenagers are chosen randomly from each of the 12 sort of futuristic districts in this country that's called Panem. And the winner of the Hunger Games is literally the last one of the contestants who's standing, because they're all forced to kill each other in order to stay alive. It's the last one standing who's alive who wins. And at the beginning of this story, the authorities, they come to choose the contestants. They choose one boy and one girl from each of the districts, and they come to District 12, and they're going to choose those contestants for the 74th annual Hunger Games. And when the girl's name is selected, a piece of paper is plucked from a large bowl that contains all of the girls' names in the district who are age 12 to 19. All the girls and all the boys, they're all there. They're all sort of lined up in front. And that name is plucked out from the girls' bowl. And the name Primrose Everdeen is called out. And there's a murmur and eyes are cast down. The adults and the children of the district, they're saddened and they're shocked, as they always are, knowing that one of their children will likely die. But there's even more sadness as they realize that name, Primrose. She's just 12 years old, a frail little girl. And as the authorities step in to lead Primrose away, suddenly her older sister, Katniss Everdeen, jumps out of line and begins screaming her name, Prim, right? She's screaming her name, and the guards jump in and they're stopping her from rushing forward. They're holding her back, and she's yelling. And then all of a sudden Katniss shouts, No, I volunteer as tribute. I volunteer as tribute. And so the authorities, they release Prim and instead grab Katniss and take Katniss in her place as the female representative for District 12. It's a gripping moment. Katniss voluntarily substitutes herself for another human being, for her little sister, and is carried off to what is most likely death. It's kind of a good picture of Jesus' voluntary substitution. But of course, Jesus' substitution doesn't work quite like Katniss's. I mean, Jesus doesn't just take the place of a loved one or someone who's well honored or respected or something. No, Jesus takes the place of the cowardly disciples and the scheming religious leaders and the misguided crowd and the spineless, power-hungry politicians. He takes the place of people like the blood-stained Barabbas. He takes the place of you and me. The Apostle Paul, we read this in the New Testament, but the Apostle Paul, he wrote to the church at Rome and he put it this way: rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though perhaps for a good person someone might actually dare to die. But God proves his love for us in that while we still were sinners, Christ died for us. It's your sin that put Jesus there. Turning away from God, making your own agenda your highest allegiance. You're the one who put Jesus on the cross. Me too. Jesus was nailed to a cross and died for you. Jesus died in place of you. You were headed to the cross, and Jesus cried out, "No, I volunteer." There were also two criminals headed to the cross, led away to be executed with Jesus, one on his right and one on his left. And one of the criminals hanging on a cross next to Jesus after they'd been nailed there, fastened to the cross. One of the criminals yelled, "Aren't you the Messiah? Then save yourself and save us too." He was desperate. He was angry. He was raging. The other criminal rebuked him. He said, "Shut up. Don't you fear God? We're getting what we deserve." He said that. We're getting what we deserve for the evil we've done. But this is an innocent man. And then that criminal turned and said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." It's kind of an amazing thing, but this is the only time here in the Gospel of Luke when a character calls Jesus by his first name. And it creates this sort of moment of intimacy, right? There's this moment of intimacy in that. And I think we even kind of wonder, did they know each other? Is that how he could call him by his name? Did they know each other? But see, the word remember, he says, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." He says that word remember, it doesn't just mean, hey, think about or call to mind or recall, right? It means take action, do something, use your power to save. He was saying, save me, Jesus, save me when you come into your kingdom. And there, Jesus, hanging on the cross, drew in a breath, which was a hard thing to do. And he said, "I assure you that today you will be with me in paradise." The criminal hanging on the cross, getting what he deserved for the way he lived his life, turned to Jesus and was offered such grace by Jesus, such a beautiful promise. Jesus said, "Don't worry. You are going to be with me." Jesus lived as one of us on earth for 1,700 some weeks. But it's that last one when Jesus died for us, that one makes all the difference. And it opens up paradise, God's beautiful garden. It's just a garden of such beauty where we enjoy God's presence. The thing is, Jesus didn't open up paradise to us just for when we die. Jesus came that we would have an abundant life here and now as well. All right? So, okay, we won't experience the full paradise of God's beautiful garden until we too are raised from the dead. But we get a glimpse of that garden now. We get to sort of just come into the edge of that. We can step into the edge of that garden just now. In fact, God invites us to be gardeners with God to help make this life beautiful and good here and now. To embody, we're invited to embody Jesus in the world today. None of us knows how many weeks we'll actually live. But our lives, our very lives, and this time They are a gift from God. It is a fragile gift, but this 1 week that Jesus lived and died, it makes all the difference for all the rest of the weeks in your life. You get to choose. You get to choose how to live those 4,000 weeks or so, whatever it is. You get to choose how to live your 4,000 weeks. And you do choose every day, every week. You are making choices. How do you choose to live, to truly live after Jesus took your place and died for you so that you could live? Not just when you die, but so that you could live here and now. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom.